Welcome to the Melinda Eitzen Show. I'm Melinda. Today we have with us David Conklin, private investigator. Welcome, David.
Good morning. How are you?
Great. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, private investigator, how long have you been doing that?
Since 2022.
And what did you do before?
I was a police officer here in the DFW area for almost 13 years.
Oh, so that's probably some good background for the private investigation job.
It certainly helps.
What type of private investigations do you do, or do people hire you for?
Mostly we do criminal defense. You know, having investigated everything for so long as police officers, we and everybody on our team has former law enforcement experience. So now it's easy to just apply those same investigative skills to the criminal defense side.
I see. So criminal defense lawyers hire you.
Correct.
I
Yes.
see. And I've noticed, as you know, I'm a family lawyer. I've noticed the criminal defense lawyers use investigators a lot more.
Very much more. Yes.
So what do you do for them? Like, what are they hiring you to do?
We review discovery. We look over the case, see if there's any missteps made by police or investigators, detectives, etc. We contact witnesses and try to get more of a full picture of the story. Because I can tell you from experience, especially in a lot of domestic type calls and things like that, when officers arrive, their main focus is, well, why are we here tonight? And they don't get sort of a full picture of why things have happened or anything like that. It's cut to the chase. And do we need to make an arrest?
I see. Well, and those could be dangerous calls. So they have to also be thinking about their safety, keeping everyone safe in the moment.
Right.
And not some big, how did we get here? You know, what led up to this? They're trying to de-escalate the situation.
Right. And oftentimes it is usually de-escalated by the time police arrive. There's just, as you know, there's always more to the story.
Yes.
And that's what we're doing, is trying to figure out what else might be pertinent, you know, because somebody could have had a response to something that has happened to them in the past. You know, maybe that person had been abusive towards them. And when they were in this situation, they recognized signs that might have led them to think that they needed to defend themselves, and they might have done so a little preemptively. Things like that. You know,
I
there's
see.
always some precipitating factors that happen.
And then that helps the lawyer who's representing the accused to explain that to the jury or to the judge.
Absolutely. I mean, it always helps to know more. So that's our primary job, is people and talking to people and trying to find all the details.
Will the witnesses usually talk to you?
It's hit and miss. It really just depends. You know, everybody, I mean, we let people know from the get-go that we're defense investigators. So a lot of times they're automatically on guard and they think, oh, you're not on my side or something like that. And that we're going to try and maybe twist their words or something. And that's not the case. I mean, we're on a fact-finding mission. And even if those are bad facts, and you know this as an attorney, you need to know that. You need to know if there are bad facts.
Right. Yeah, it might affect settlement. I mean, most cases, including criminal, end up, they call it pleading out, right? Or getting settled with, most of them don't go to trial, but they can't settle well if they don't have all the facts.
Right. And it certainly helps, you know, in instances where you're going to trial and you want to prepare these, your opening and closing for a jury, things like that, to paint more of the whole picture for them so that a jury can better understand that situation.
Gotcha. So are there times when even the people who call the police or who did witness the crime, are there times when then they don't want to cooperate later?
Yes. And that can become quite a hurdle for us. It happens more so in cases where something happens in the public view, right? Where you have an offense that happens in a parking lot or, you know, in an apartment complex, things like that. And somebody witnessed it and they felt like law enforcement needed to know these other details at the time. But then by the time it goes to trial, you know, a year or more later, and we try to contact them again to see how much they remember in our trial preparation, we get the, oh, I already told everybody everything. I don't want to be involved. And it's already too late at that point. And I always try to explain to people, think about it if you were in that position, or if you had a loved one who was in that position who's being accused and is, prepared or awaiting trial. Wouldn't you want us to call anybody that might have been a witness so that we can have a clearer picture about what happened?
Mm-hmm. Right. It's kind of your public duty. So they felt their public duty at the moment that they called.
Right.
They felt like, ooh, I need to help. This is a stranger, but I still need help. But they lose somehow that urgency to help.
Yeah, as a year or two goes on, it's the furthest thing from their mind. Mm-hmm. And so getting contacted about it again all over, mm-hmm. they don't understand how long the judicial process actually takes sometimes.
Mm-hmm. But it's important. It's maybe even more important at that point, because that's when we're going to actually be determining if that person is penalized or not. And what really happened is what the judge or the jury wants to know.
Right. There's just so much that goes into it. And, the state has the burden of proof, and therefore they have all the resources at their disposal to try to make their case. Mm-hmm. And on the defense side, most people usually only have their attorney.
Yeah.
And, they may not have a case that needs an investigator, or even if you do, you've got just one investigator maybe mm-hmm. who is getting all this background information. And you're also susceptible, or, you're stuck with what you can financially provide for yourself. And some people may not even be able to afford their own attorney, and they may have to get a public defender.
So your plea to the public is, please cooperate.
If you see something happen, just be willing to talk about it, and know that it's going to come later on, that somebody might call you and there may be some follow-up questions. And we also need to know what you remember, because you can't testify to things that you don't remember. So mm-hmm. It's very important.
What happens to us in family law, so meaning divorce cases or custody cases that aren't divorces, is people always want to say, well, can't I just give you an affidavit? Meaning they just want to write it down. And we have to explain the rules of evidence don't allow us to put a piece of paper in at trial. We have to have a human being, because, and it's an important reason, because we want to make sure it's reliable and that somebody has a right to cross-examine that person. And if you could just let people write it all down on a piece of paper, we could have a lot of forgeries, and not understand, like you said, the background behind it. How do we get to the piece of paper?
Right. And, if you take a cell phone video or something like that, you have to do what's called proving it up. And that is being present in court to say, yes, I took this video on this day at this mm-hmm. time. This is what I witnessed. And it's no different than when law enforcement are putting forth their case. They have to come testify, and the jury has to see what's on their body cam or their dash cam. Mm-hmm. And they have to explain the situation in order to get that video in.
Yeah. So we're dealing with those rules. Help us out. So do you do any work besides criminal defense?
Yes. As you know, we do some family law cases. We've had the pleasure of working with you and your firm, which has been very nice.
Thank you.
A lot of the family law things, we get the common infidelity type mm-hmm. cheaters investigations. We also deal with custody issues where maybe one parent is not keeping that child where they're supposed to, or in a certain geographical location, things like that. So those are the things that we'll go and document and then come testify as to what we witnessed, so that if you have a motion for enforcement hearing or anything like that, you've got your evidence and you have someone to support it.
You and I have worked on a case together where the one party keeps calling the police over and over and over for no reason. So for the public, like, when is it appropriate to call the police for your domestic disputes, and when is it not?
Yeah, well, I think the obvious part is if there's an emergency, right? Life-threatening, or someone's going to get hurt, or someone, needs medical attention. Obviously, we call 911, right? We learned that from the time we're kids. But if if you're having a verbal argument, that's not necessarily the time to call the police. Unless you have some significant fear that something is going to come from that, that's probably not what you need to be utilizing police for. You know, I have mixed feelings about custody issues because every time an officer shows up and it's something custody related, 99% of the time the officers are going to tell you that's a civil matter. It's not criminal. Police respond to criminal matters only. Well, I say they respond to a lot of civil matters too.
They don't want to.
They're called on a lot of civil matters, but they can only take enforcement on things that are criminal and not civil. And so, but we have told people in the past, like I'm sure you've told people that are your clients, you know, sometimes you just need documentation. And so I understand the importance of that, but just know that the police may not be the most helpful in those types of situations.
You know, the police are busy and they have, I mean, we're in a huge metroplex with a lot of actual scary crime. I just hate it when I see their time wasted being called for no reason to go check on the other person.
Welfare checks are an extremely common thing, especially in the early stages of divorce, which always baffles me because, you know, when you were married to someone for however many years and you've had these kids together, you were okay to go on a trip or work or these things and leave your child with your spouse. But the second they're not your spouse, all of a sudden there's some need for intervention. So that's an extremely common thing, as you know, in divorce cases.
Can you get in trouble for calling the police too many times for a false reason, no reason? Only
so if the calls are abusive, you know, there is a statute, silent or abusive calls to 911, right? So if they find that you are abusing 911, which hinders their ability to respond to emergencies,
right,
then you could potentially face some criminal charges for that. Or if you are making false reports. So there's those two things that you could potentially find yourself responsible for.
The other thing that sometimes private investigators are asked to help people with is feeling safe, meaning I'm not feeling safe. What could I do about my environment, for example, to feel safer? Do you ever get involved with that?
I have people occasionally who, you know, they think that maybe with this past relationship they've been in, whether it was a marriage or just a long-term boyfriend or girlfriend, they think maybe there's listening devices or things like that might be left in their residence. So those are things that we can go and check for. And then we can also give people just some crime prevention type tips, right? For all the time that we've spent on patrol as police officers, you know, there are a lot of things that people can do to help secure their residence and things and make them feel safe, whether that's cameras, lights, you know, light. I said it my entire career, light deters crime.
Oh.
That's why more things happen at night. People are breaking into businesses and stuff at night versus, you know, most people aren't doing things in broad daylight, right? Except here in DFW, I guess. But, and then secondary locks and things like that. And, you know, I don't own stock in any particular products or anything like that, but I have a handful of things that I'll recommend to people that I have just seen be effective.
Oh, that's good. Well, give us a tip.
Well, if you have some issues where I'll go back to the domestic type situation where if you've been in sort of a violent past with an ex and you feel like maybe they're still going to come over, there are these supplementary door locks that, you know, it's like a little fork looking thing that goes up underneath the doorknob and it has a rubber pad and it's a pole. And so it stretches down to the ground. And those are extremely difficult to get a door down if that lock is in place.
Oh, where would you get something like that?
Amazon.
Oh,
everybody orders off
right.
Amazon.
What are they called? Like if you were Googling it.
I think if you just look up supplemental door locks or secondary door locks. You'll find a bunch of different options. They have ones that are kind of like at the hotel that it sort of hangs. So it's not the chain, but it's a little bit stronger. But all of those they're only as strong as that door frame is.
Yeah.
And the one that I'm speaking about is kind of like a club almost for your steering wheel, how it keeps it in place.
Yes.
It does the same thing for the door because you can't overcome that leverage and get the whole door down.
Oh,
so it's
that's
more than just the
great.
frame.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, they're
and
very.
that doesn't sound like it would be terribly expensive solution.
No, I think they're less than $30. Maybe they're not incredibly expensive.
What a great tip!
And you could probably even find those at a hardware store or some in a hardware section of Home Depot maybe. Or I've never looked there, but I know they're on Amazon.
Nowadays, too, with modern technology, a lot of the doorbells have, cameras, and people's cameras, they can look on their phone and see activity, and it'll record and all of that. So that seems like that would be helpful in either if somebody's nervous, they can kind of see what's going on, even when you can talk through your phone, through your doorbell, even if you're not at your house.
Yes, and I have those on my home. So it's a great investment. It's a great peace of mind. And I always say you can never put a price on peace of mind.
Yeah, that's right. And the light, what do you think about the motion sensor lights?
I think motion sensor lights are very good. I think when someone is out up to no good and a light comes on, it immediately gives pause.
Yes.
Most people aren't desensitized to that because initially they may not know that if someone's controlling that light or the simple fact of the matter is they don't want to be seen if they're doing those things.
Yes.
So lights are good. If you have exterior lights on your home, either set those on a timer to automatically come on or off. There's all sorts of options for things like that. Or just, do it yourself. But the more light you have outside your home, the better.
People ask me, of course, when they're going through a divorce, what are my tips and warnings? And one of my warnings is assume someone's following you and taking a picture.
Act as though that's kind of the way I carry out my life is just, act like everybody's watching,
Because it's legal, right, for a private investigator in public to follow somebody around and take their picture. And there's nothing wrong with that. They're allowed to do that and use that picture in court.
Right. And even beyond that, there's nothing wrong with if you're in public, any other civilian recording anything. You have no expectation of privacy while you're in public. And we would even get those calls as officers where somebody would be upset that someone's recording them or you're in a coffee shop. I mean, what would you like us to do? There's not much that we can do about that.
Right. So people should be aware of that. So if, I always say first, don't have the affair. But if you're not going to listen to the first piece of advice, which a lot of people don't, then be discreet. Like, don't be doing it in public.
Right.
Where they can take a picture of you. Now, I don't think you can take a camera and go up to somebody's window at their house, right?
No, very much so. No. You definitely start bordering on trespassing, but there's also a statute. It used to be called improper visual recording or invasive visual recording. I think they've changed the statute name, but it's the same. But essentially, there are places that are in public that are private, such as bathrooms, changing rooms, fitting rooms, things like that. You can't be, going to a fitting room door and sticking a camera over the door and recording somebody in there, things like that.
When you are interviewing witnesses, do you tape record what they're saying?
Yes. If it is a witness, we do record our calls for multiple reasons. The biggest one is it helps us go back and, remember exactly what was said, even though we're typing a case report and we have very detailed notes. The second thing is just for our own protection because we have had people go and complain to district attorney's office and say, oh, they called and they said that they were law enforcement, or they called and said that they were the DA's investigator. And that's not the case. And we have that to back ourselves up. So.
Oh, that's smart. And it's legal in Texas. I always tell people, my clients, it's legal in Texas to tape record a conversation as long as one person knows they're being tape recorded.
Correct.
So you don't have to announce, and your spouse or your friend does not have to announce that they're taping you. They can tape record it, and they can play that in court, and that's allowed.
Right. And I think a lot of that misinformation, which is worse than no information for sure, but the misinformation comes from, we all get those calls where it's like, hi, David, I'm from such and such, and I'm calling you on a recorded line. Well, you got to understand that they're probably calling from a state that is a two-party state where they have to let somebody know that they're being recorded. But we're looking at it as, well, I'm in Texas, and they told me that I'm being recorded.
Yeah, so we don't have to do that. We can tape record people. And like you said, what's great about it is it shows the truth. I've been practicing 30 years. I've had so many cases where somebody, he said, she said, he said, she said, play the tape.
Exactly.
And then you're like,
That's what I loved about, when I was on the street as an officer. If I went to a fight or something that happened at a bar or whatever, I always, if they had surveillance, I got with somebody and I wanted to watch the tape first before I talked to somebody.
Oh, right.
So that way I knew at least who threw the first punch or what have you.
Right. Well, and some of it is people are being dishonest, and some of it is people just don't remember accurately,
Alcohol plays into that.
In both of our jobs, sometimes people use substances that causes them to make poor choices.
Correct. And sometimes they're just not the best decision makers to start with. So you add that in there.
It's not a good combination.
It's not a good combination.
I had a case once where the PI, it wasn't you, was in the hotel. So this guy is having an affair. He's in the hotel, and he somehow knows what room he's in. He's in the room opposite, and he literally gets the picture of the woman is standing at the hotel room door, and the husband opens the hotel room door, and he's half dressed, and here's the woman about to walk in the hotel room. I was like, oh my gosh.
We have found ourselves in those situations too. So
people need to be cautious that, that doesn't feel as public as a parking lot, right? They weren't making out in the parking lot.
Right.
But there's a lot of people tracking each other. Is that true?
Yes. I think a lot of us.
Mobile phones.
For sure. My wife and I, we share our location with each other just so it's a safety thing, especially in our line of work.
Yes.
So there's a lot of things that people do to track each other. And if you're married, there's not really... Essentially, there's not anything illegal about it. If you guys co-own property, like your vehicles and things like that, your husband or wife might be tracking you.
And what people don't realize is with the cloud, some devices speak to other devices.
Yes.
I've had so many cases where they were doing something on their phone and they did not realize it was populating on their iPad.
Yes.
In one case, it was populating on the child's iPad. Not good.
No.
And they think, oh, I deleted it. No, it's in the cloud. It's still on your iPad.
You might have deleted it off your phone, but it showed up on more than one device.
Right.
And not only that, a lot of these newer vehicles have an app. You might have a Ford app or Land Rover or whatever, and they show your vehicle's location. And that's like a safety thing. They show you if it's running or if the doors are locked. And
where it has been. My husband has a Toyota, and his feature is the map shows you, it says I'm leaving breadcrumbs. That's what they call it, to show you where you have been, which is convenient if you're kind of lost and trying to get back. Like sometimes we go up to Broken Bow a lot, and we'll be driving in the woods a little bit and kind of neither of us are directionally strong. So that's a great feature because we can just follow the breadcrumbs. But your spouse could just get in your car and see.
Or if they have the app on their phone,
Yes.
You guys both own the vehicle. So it's handy for you to have the app and remote start your vehicle when it's hot or cold. And so you've done all these things for convenience, and they're there to bite you when you're maybe not doing what you should be
Making
doing.
poor choices. Yeah, live your life in a way where it doesn't matter if they're following you or taking a picture. That's a good motto. But humans are flawed.
We are.
And
I'm no exception. I'm
do
flawed
not
as well.
always make good decisions. Or they're desperate. Like, I think a lot of people have an affair. The affair doesn't wreck the marriage. Their marriage is already wrecked. And they're too chicken to just say, I want a divorce. And so they create an event, enter affair, and almost on purpose to get them out of it, I think. I mean, this is going into psychology.
I agree, and I'm going to try not to get on my soapbox about this one, but it's, things have happened to get somebody to that point for sure. Mm-hmm. And nowadays, especially with technology and social media, everybody wants that immediate dopamine hit that, you're liked or what have you. And when you get attention, we want that instant gratification. And so we pursue those things. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't been getting the attention elsewhere, you'll seek it from anyone who will give it.
Mm-hmm. Maybe not in a healthy way. Okay, so let's give people some warnings, like from your police background. What should people be careful about? Because it's one thing to have an affair. It's another thing to involve yourself with scary people because of you're putting yourself in a scary situation where now you could really end up getting trafficked or, something extreme happening.
Yeah, I think, if you find yourself in that moment where you're feeling anything might be a little risky or sketchy, really stop, give yourself an entire minute to think about everything that's happened and how this is unfolded to the point where it is now, and think about what you need to do. What's the best choice in going forward? Because you're chasing this high of gratification, but there are, bad people out there who are looking to take advantage of those things.
Mm-hmm. And we're not, unfortunately, it's not, it never was Beaver Cleaver, but people thought it was. And we're in a big major city where there's a lot of crime and criminals, and, trafficking is a real thing where guys get kidnapped and they are put into bad situations. And I think there's a lot of that here. I think people are, not aware if they don't have any reason to be aware. How wonderful for them.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are oblivious, and they're going about their day in their world.
Mm-hmm. And the bad thing about substance abuse, if you are under the influence of a substance and in a dangerous place, you don't have control of your own, senses at the time.
Right.
So, like you said, if they have a bad feeling, they should listen to their gut and get out.
Yeah, find somebody who might be able to help.
Mm-hmm. I've done a lot of work with domestic violence, and there's a cycle of domestic violence. And I'm sure you saw that when you were on the job as a police officer. And you probably see it now too, because sometimes that's what they're being accused of, right? Is domestic violence. So what is the cycle, and what should people be aware of that, hey, I need to get out of this situation?
Yeah. One of the most early indicators before you're going to have any type of physical violence, or that you're just in an abusive or toxic relationship, is being cut off from your support. That's usually the first step. Is an abuser will make you both financially or emotionally and wholly dependent on them, and they will make you believe that other people in your family are a problem. Mm-hmm. And then it starts to get into the physical violence after that, where now that you don't have support and you don't have anyone else to go to, and you're going to be forced to stay with them, then, you have no other choice. And then, after there's an event, there's typically what's called the honeymoon phase, where it's, I love you so much, I'll never do that again. Here's flowers, all sorts of stuff. And it's just until it gets
repeat.
Yeah. Rinse and repeat.
If somebody doesn't really take some proactive steps to get help, they're not going to magically become nonviolent if they're violent people.
Right. And typically a lot of that happens, in adult relationships, people in their 30s and so on. And, not that younger people don't do it, but when you haven't fully matured yet, so you're still learning yourself, and there's a lot more mistakes. We all know there's a lot more mistakes when you're young. But, and not that that's any excuse, but people, once you get to your 30s, you're set. There's very little room for change at that point. And therapy is not necessarily going to magically make someone nonviolent, especially if they're not willing to change themselves.
Yeah, it has to be very proactive. So I'm sorry, I won't do it again. There's some reason that person goes to violence. They don't have other tools, right? And maybe they grew up in a violent household and it's repeating itself, but they don't have another tool. They don't know what else to do. So when they get back into that stressor environment, that's their go-to. One thing that I see a lot in the beginning phase is they're not letting someone leave a room. They're they're grabbing them by the arm and not letting them leave. And to me, that's a big sign. Like, people will come to me and I'll say, was there ever domestic violence? And they think I mean they got beat up and put in the hospital.
Sure, a black eye or something.
Right. Like, no, if they're restraining you, or another common problem is taking the phone.
Yes.
They want to call for help and they're taking the phone. That's illegal.
Both of those examples are illegal. There's what's called unlawful restraint, which is when you're restricting another adult's movement. And I've seen those be very small things to, nearly kidnapping. And the phone thing is definitely a big one. Everybody's life is on their cell phones these days. And so, but prohibiting someone from making an emergency call is also an offense. So, it's definitely not a smart situation. And then when the cops come, even if there is a false allegation of abuse, but you prevented a 911 call, that's going to make them believe that maybe you did abuse them, which is why you had, taken their phone or whatever.
Yes. So my advice is, if there's a struggle, like, don't get in a struggle over the phone. I see that with adults and children. Like, the child's acting out and now the adult's going to rip their fingers off that phone to get it. And I see it adult to adult because I suspect he's having an affair. I'm going to look at his phone, and now we're having literally a physical fight over the phone. Like, don't have a fight over the phone. And if anything is starting to escalate, just leave. Like, you do not have to stay there and have a showdown.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the situation too, where I think a police response would be warranted, There's nothing wrong with leaving. Go next door if you have a neighbor or a friend or something like that. Go somewhere where and you can get police involved and retrieve your phone through those means. And
not participate in the altercation.
Right.
Sometimes you don't have a choice, because we talked about they're restraining you. But if you have a choice, get the heck out.
Yeah, and those kinds of things are extremely dangerous, because when you're in a relationship with someone, that there's that passion there, and things can happen really quickly and can end up really bad in those situations. And you
Passions
can never
are high.
Yes, and you can never take it back.
Right. What is the name of your company?
Private Investigation Endeavors.
Private Investigation Endeavors. Okay, we'll put on the screen how to reach you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This was wonderful.
Great. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. And that's a wrap. Try to stay safe. Thank you for watching the Melinda Eitzen Show.